Shalom Chavrim, and welcome to lesson 37 of Learning Biblical Hebrew. We've worked our way through Genesis chapter 2, and today we begin Genesis chapter 3, which unfortunately is a little bit ominous because here a certain creature appears who is rather slithering and slimy and has some unfortunate suggestions which he plants in the mind of the woman. This is Genesis chapter 3 verse 1, and I've divided it into two parts. This is A, the first part. Hanachash haya arum mikol hayat hasadeh asher asa Yahweh Elohim. Okay. And the snake was cunning from all of animal, well, it really just says animal, but means animals. The field, sadeh means field, and so the of is understood because these two words are joined together. And what would be an H ending here has become a T ending, which shows how these two words are joined in what's called a construct chain. So we have, it's literally saying animal the field. So it's meaning animals of the field. Asher, who or which, Rasa, made, Yahweh Elohim, Yahweh God. Now, an interesting point here is that in the previous verse, the last verse of Genesis chapter 2, verse 25, we read that the man and the woman were arumim, which meant naked. And so here is a very similar word that means cunning, crafty, shrewd, wily. It's amazing how many words English has for this. In the book of Proverbs, this word has a positive sense, but evidently not here. So we go for one of those more negative senses. But the similarity of this word with the word in chapter 2, verse 25, meaning naked, emphasizes their innocence and its contrast to the snake's cunning. Now, there's no attempt in the account here to explain how the snake came to be like that. And it's not said that the snake is a supernatural being. However, in Revelation chapter 12 verse 9 and in chapter 20 verse 2, that's in the New Testament book of Revelation, Satan is referred to as the snake of former time, sometimes serpent, which is just an older English word for snake. So the snake or serpent of former time, which seems to be referring to this passage. And there's a widespread belief in traditional cultures that the snake is or houses a spirit, and it's usually a bad one. That means that a person from any of those cultures reading this will understand it much more readily than a modern secular Westerner. Another interesting point is pointed out by Wenham in his Word Bible commentary, that if you look at the classification of animals in Leviticus chapter 11 and Deuteronomy chapter 14, the snake is about as far down the line of unclean animals as you can go. So obviously there are a lot of associations with the snake. And here's another interesting point. Cunning from all animals of the field. Now this is the common Hebrew way of saying more than. So it's traditionally translated as more cunning than all the other animals. But if I say in English, I say he's more cunning than me, that implies that I'm cunning too, at least to some degree, not as much as him, but I am cunning. That's implied when we say in English, he's more cunning than me. But the Hebrew form here doesn't imply that the other animals were cunning at all. So to translate the verse as the snake was more cunning than all the other animals is misleading. And this verse is actually paralleled if we look down to verse 14, where it says the snake, this is after God's judgment, the snake is cursed, and it uses exactly the same idiom, mikol chayat hasedeh. In fact, this exact same phrase is used in verse 14, where the snake is cursed from all the other animals, and in that case it's clearly meaning that the snake has a curse but not any of the other animals. So that's a pretty good indication that here we should translate something like the snake, unlike all the other animals, was cunning. Okay, so what have I written down here? Yes, that's what I've written here. Look at that. Now the snake was cunning, unlike all the other animals Yahweh God had made. So let's go on to the second part of the verse, which we have here. ויאמר אל האישה, אף כי אמר אלוהים לא תאכלו מכל עץ הגן. And he said to the woman, let's turn up our word by word translation here. And he said to the woman, even indeed, Amar Elohim, said God, not you eat, and this is you plural, from all tree of the garden. And so all could also mean any. We have this little subtle distinction in English, and sometimes we could translate all, sometimes we can translate any. In this case, with the negative, it's meaning any. Let's go down here. And he said to the woman, did God really say? So this afki, these two words are working together. By themselves we could translate even indeed, but to make sense of it in English, in one word we would we'd say, did God indeed say, or did God really say, you are not to eat from any tree in the garden? And when this is being read, you can put a bit of expression into his voice. I mean, you could make him hiss if you like. Did God really say you are not to eat? So he's cunningly planting a suggestion in the ear of this innocent and naive woman. And we just notice a point that we made earlier. Even though these chapters, Genesis 2 and 3, often use God's full title, Yahweh Elohim, here in this particular passage, Genesis chapter 3 verse 1 to 5, in the snake's words and the woman's replies, we leave out the Yahweh part and we just use Elohim. Did God really say? So the snake is perhaps unwilling to give God his full due, his full title, as he cunningly plants this suggestion in the fertile mind of the woman. So there we have it, a cunning, evil being plays to the weaknesses of naive, innocent people and brings their world crashing down, as we'll see as we, in later lessons, we continue looking through Genesis chapter 3. An event replayed many times since, unfortunately. And there is good news, but it'll be a little while before we get to it, unfortunately. But first we just look at the way that this is expressed in the Hebrew and the different subtleties of it. We notice the similarity of these words here as well. Hebrew just loves the similarities, eat from all. And notice too, as others have pointed out, the way that the cunning snake subtly changes God's words. That wasn't exactly what God had said, but this is the way that the snake expresses it and makes God sound a lot meaner than he really was. Did God really say that you are not to eat fruit from any tree in the garden? Well, she doesn't correct him, but she tries to correct him, but she doesn't correct him fully and completely. We think of the much better example of how Jesus corrects Satan by quoting scripture when he's in Jesus' temptation, which we read about in the Gospels. But the woman is a little bit too naive and innocent, and unfortunately really no match for the cunning of the snake, and it's going to cause problems that we'll read about in the rest of Genesis chapter 3.